Welcome to Stories from the Standing Room. Join us for tales of history, phantoms, folklore, ghost stories, mysterious happenings, and more. A playful and fun weekly podcast with a
British husband and his American wife.
Join us from inside our 450-year-old home in the English countryside.
For journeys into the past, the arcane, and the downright spooky.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 17 of Stories from the Standing Room. Hello, husband.
Hello, wife.
Today we have it's an episode as we lead up to Halloween. This is a big time for very scary stories and folklore and facts, and that's where we come in. And today we're going to be talking about, fear is our primary focus. Fear, dead man's bones. We also have we were talking about in the promo this morning, the definition of the nightmare. The oppressive, sometimes it's called the hag, the oppressive force comes in the night and sits upon your chest, this dark entity. An amazing story from one of our listeners, Emma, has written in with a real life experience of one of those. So before we get into talking about that, I do want to thank again our SoundCloud folks. Thank you so much for all of your participation. Thank you, YouTube. Our subscribers are climbing, husband. And also over at storiesfromthestandingroom.com, thank you to our web guru, Chuck Hunsucker. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you a shout out. And you can find us on Facebook at Stories from the Standing Room and on Twitter at Standing Room HRH. So that's Haunted Rooms and History. So we were talking about fear when we were putting this together, you and I. And we were talking about the time of year we were talking about as Halloween begins to take over the UK more and more. You always say it's America.
Halloween springs from here, it's British Island tradition. But the modern version of Halloween, of the dressing up and trick and treat, has come over increasingly from the States over the last 20 years. Because we did have bonfire nights, and it was the lighting of the bonfires, which is the direct Celtic tradition, which used to be far more important here at this time of year. I mean, it was 5th of November, and it was associated to Guy Fawkes and the Gunpowder Plot, but it does have that Celtic tradition.
So the bonfires at the end of the harvest tonight, when we are recording this, is the big hunter's moon, because we had the harvest moon, we have hunter's moon tonight, this massive moon out there as we are recording this here in the UK. What is this particular time of year? We always say the veil gets thinner, and you were explaining it.
It may be more accurate to say the gap closes. In the Celtic tradition, it's the gap or the space between things which is important and holds the energy and the spirit and the gods. For instance, the gap between the sea and the beach, or the sea and the land being the beach, is special because it's the gap. The gap between the water and the land, as in the riverbank, is very special. So that's why offerings are thrown into rivers at that point, because it's the gap between the two. And maybe even more importantly than those, would be the gap between the tree and the bark, because that's the space where the spirit would dwell. Because within the woods, particularly within the sacred trees, for instance, the oak, the spirits would be within that gap between the tree and the bark. So it's the gap between the two worlds in which the spirits and the energy of life dwells.
Very beautiful explanation. I've never heard it put like that. So not the ocean, not the land, but in between.
Yes.
And then between the bark and the wood itself, within the tree, the meat of the tree, that is the magical place that both worlds meet.
Yep. And what we have at this time of year is the gap between seasons. We have the space between the two core seasons, summer and winter.
Yes.
This is the space between the two. So there is a space also between the two worlds, because you have the light of the summer or the day and the dark of the winter or the night. And it's this gap which is inhabited by the spirits, and that's the point where the spirits are closer to the physical world in the Celtic tradition.
Oh, see, so all the stuff that we're learning. And the bonfire that you mentioned, I remember when you first took me to this huge, it's like 40 feet high, this massive, and the running of the tar barrels and all that.
Yeah, those traditions,
These ancient customs to remind the sun.
Well, to remind the sun to come back. It does two things. It reminds the sun to come back. And in the northern land, it's darker in the winter. And for those of you who are in the southern part of the state, it's also much colder and harder to survive in the winter. So you need to remind the sun to come back. And it is something, it's about fertility, it's about the cycle. It's about making sure that cycle happens and the sun does come back and the cycle happens fully. So you have the fertility of the land in the spring, but you have to remind the winter that this is your space, but the sun will follow through.
The veil is, you say, not thin, but it is
open.
Open.
it's almost as if we step out of this world and step into the other. So the veil isn't external to us. We are within the veil at this time of year. We are in the realm of the spirit or closer to them.
So this whole month then, as we, it even goes into November.
Yeah, well, it's a time of year. It's this point in the year where things close down.
So we were talking about fear and about what frightens us and why these stories are so popular. They're now getting amped up to gore and torture porn, where it's just ridiculous. But the psychology of fear and what it is that frightens us, and when we were children, and when we look back through different cultures and civilizations, what scared them? What is the key ingredient that frightens humanity?
Well, I think one of the things that we do need to accept or recognize when we talk about the past and other cultures is within Western culture, we have real fear of the real world, or we have pretend fear or perceived fear of the supernatural world.
Yes.
But in the past, the supernatural and the natural world were not separate. They were one and the same. So the supernatural and the natural world were interwoven.
So dragons were real?
Yes, to those people at those times they were.
Yeah.
They didn't see things as separate. I mean, we have things explained to us. To them, you're in one small place, one small village. You didn't know there was a dragon the other side of the hill or not.
True. Because you only knew your immediate area and what you were told. And what you've been told was the truth, therefore...
Yeah, same as now. What you're told as truth is truth.
Earth is flat.
Yeah, whatever it is, but it was all part of the same bag, really.
So we talked about, I actually did a little all-call on Facebook about what is their greatest fear. What is the greatest fear? Do you want to hear some of them before we talk about ours? Or Okay.
Please.
So some folks wrote in with some eerie happenings, and Gail writes in, she says she lived in a house where a pickup truck would come halfway up the driveway. It was a long one, and then it would just poof, disappear. And she says that this was observed by at least 24 people because nobody believed us. She says the landlord explained that this has been happening for years. And she says even the thought of that still scares her.
It is scary. It's so normal. Yet so scary.
It is.
Something you'd expect to see, you wouldn't even look twice. And then suddenly it's not there.
That is a very good point that you have there, because a pickup truck is a very normal, everyday thing. And we always expect the scary to be, I don't know, like Jigsaw in the movie Saw, or something exceptional.
Yeah.
Like
visually abnormal and out there and different.
Yes, like Woman in Black. That is an exceptional place where the water comes in, they're isolated. It is an exceptional thing.
Spooky with dead children wandering around, rather than just a pickup truck, which you wouldn't even notice, because how many people have noticed that, shall I say, haven't noticed it disappeared, not think about the fact that it wasn't even there. So there may have been many more people saw it, but they didn't notice it because it was so normal.
That's really a good point. Like there's the evil clowns or something that would be on that verge of fear, but a very normal thing. Like
you'd also certainly notice an evil clown at the door, but a pickup truck, you wouldn't even look twice.
That's interesting. Okay, so we had some more submissions. The next one, a very real fear, submitted by Precious Sean. She writes, even prior to the original movie Red Dawn, she said, definitely after, I've always worried about war on our soil. And hearing parents in the news while growing up just planted the seed, nuclear war and earthquakes, biggest fear.
Yeah. I mean, particularly the nuclear war, we all grew up in the shadow of a certain age.
Yes.
We grew up in the shadow of the daily reality.
Our parents lived through the war.
And bombing
I mean, there has been, wars, but as far as this obliteration, it always has been looming, and always the big one supposedly going to strike.
And the wars are there, but they were in different foreign places. Yes. They weren't on home soil. They weren't what was happening 50, 60, 70 years ago.
I know it doesn't seem like that long ago.
I know. It's showing our age by actually adding lots of decades on there.
So you think about the primal fear, that's a very real one. This is in 2016. They're writing and what their fears are. Another one writes in, Kathleen Reader Hill writes, she says, I love to watch movies because I asked if it's a movie or a thing or a book or a situation, what it was that frightened you. Mm-hmm. I love to watch movies and be scared out of my mind. And very few movies can do that. But any horror movie I love. I just love to see if I can find one that will legitimately scare me. It's my favorite genre of film. To name one of a handful of films, the scariest would be The Exorcist.
Yeah, that was truly scary back in the day. And also it was so new. Yes. Because it was scary and still is. That malicious entity thing is really scary.
Well, even the pictures of Linda in the makeup, it is legitimately horrifying this many years later. So she writes that it was like no other horror movie, original, crazy, scary. The fear that I felt when I first watched it still carries on today. And she says that it's the only horror film that she will not watch alone. Would you?
I found it really scary and disturbing. So
Yes.
I'd actually go as far as probably not even watch it because I found it disturbing.
It is disturbing. It's not like a fun, playful, scary.
It's not a place you can go for entertainment. It's just a scary place. So I probably wouldn't watch it again because I think like in that genre of that period, like The Omen, you can just watch it as a fun movie. But The Exorcist was like something else. It was more scary.
It had a carrier in it that was different. The Omen was more of that 1970s
more gothic, theatrical tradition of scary.
Yes. So there is something about The Exorcist to this day.
Yeah.
Something was in that, and that definitely even just thinking about it, and the makeup, which was this is 73, was it 73 or 75, something like that?
Ago.
Stephen King. Do you know what Stephen King says? Scariest thing. This is the man who literally, I think, has an in with the astral plane. To be able to find horrific things beyond belief, beyond imagination. What
I
does
don't
he
know,
say?
but after you said that, I don't know. Fried eggs.
Yeah, it's something like that. He said this is a quote from Stephen King, the very scariest thing is always the moment before he starts to write.
Well, that would make sense as the writer,
Isn't that
wouldn't
interesting?
It? Yeah, because she's thinking, oh, shit.
What scares Stephen King?
Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
You think of, okay, well, what frightens him? And somehow he's able to weave these horrific things. He literally has them coming through page after page after page after page. But the one thing that frightens him is the moment before he puts pen to paper.
Well, it is that thing about what the fear which is real and fear which is like outside or entertainment fear.
That's true. So the fear of failure is one of the most common fears. Another one writes, one of our very favorite listeners, to be honest, my own demise is what terrifies me the most. He says, I probably think about it every day. For some reason, it just goes back to my late teens. It terrifies me. Is that something that you think of as a fear?
Not really, but these are rational fears in horror films and ghost stories, etc.
Yes.
We're talking about irrational fears, and maybe it's a difference in the rational fear, things that affect us.
Yes.
Oh, I can't write, or my own demise, or I'm going to lose my job.
Yes.
And we all have those fears. I'm going to lose my job, how I'm going to pay for the house, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Now, that's a real and a rational fear. The other stuff, which is it's the stuff that comes in the middle of the night, that's the irrational fear coming from the subconscious. So it's almost the conscious and the subconscious, which having different forms of fear. One is real and physical, it's about the real life. The other one is about the unknown, the shadows.
It's far more horrifying. Like when you had to pull back the curtain and look out into the pitch black night when there was the tapping at the window. Yeah. It was not entertaining at all. But when you're in a movie theater or when you're reading a book and you have a circle of safety around you.
Yeah.
And you
secondhand, you're not involved in it. You're just observing it. You know it's a movie.
It's almost like an adrenaline rush, a junkie kind of a thing. You're just going, yes, I got to get a feed on this, but I don't have to risk my life to be able to do it. But I can experience the emotions. Like going through a haunted house, knowing that they can't hurt you, but you get to experience the emotions. There's some kind of a factor of safety. And maybe that's why it's so much fun to be able to have these ghost stories. So,
No, I was just going to say it's also something which is inherently about human experience, being spooked by these kind of experiences and tales. It goes back to the idea of sitting around the fire as primeval man and just hearing these stories of something else.
I find it comforting. The ghost story is comforting because it reaffirms that there's more to it than just this physical world. Do you find that?
I think it depends on the story.
No, that there's something else. Something else than what we see
just
beyond the senses.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about a ghost story or something that is reported to be real and a scary movie. A scary movie is just a script. A ghost story that reports or could be real is much more scary because it crosses that line between being made up and potentially being real.
Yes. So we have a submission about this, I would call the night terror or the thing that sits on your chest.
Yeah, the nightmare.
Some people call it the hag, but you mentioned in the promo this morning. Tell me about the nightmare, the words nightmare.
The nightmare, as far as I understand it, comes from the idea of it being a mare or the weight of a horse or a mare on your chest. And it's very much associated to the weight of it, and it's on your chest and you're paralyzed.
Has that ever happened to you?
Happened once.
What was it like?
Well, two things. It was on me and it lasted for quite a few hours and it was like a battle to get the thing off.
Oof.
And it was in the room and then it was on me and it was very, very, very negative. It was just not a good thing. And I just remember the weight and the fact that the weight was paralyzing me. I could not move while it was on me.
A lot of people talk about this where they say you are paralyzed, you cannot move. There is something literally on your chest.
Yeah.
The fact that you mentioned mare and the weight of it, that was the first I heard of it this morning. That's very interesting. This is a story that Emma has submitted about this particular instance. So here we go. Thank you very much, Emma. And remember, if you have a ghost story, please send it in to us, anything paranormal. We would love to be able to pepper those in with our episodes upcoming. Thank you very much for your submissions. Emma writes in, when I was 16 years old, I had a very scary experience. My little sister Leah and I shared a bedroom. One night I woke up sometime between 1 and 3 a.m. When I opened my eyes, a black flame, shadowy shaped thing was on top of me, breathing heavily. My first reaction was to scream and hit this unknown thing, but I was so scared my whole body was paralyzed and I could not catch my breath. I could sense that this was some sort of a dark spirit energy. The room was very cold, and this was summertime. As I was on my summer holidays, I had just finished high school. It felt like it was trying to take my breath away. After what seemed like a lifetime, a scream finally erupted from my throat, and I tried to hit this evil spirit. My arms went straight through it. Then suddenly, the dark shape went flying out my sliding glass patio bedroom doors. I ran into my mom and dad's room. I woke them up. I was nearly having a panic attack trying to explain what had just happened, and I stayed in their bedroom for the rest of the night, right in the middle of them. Do you realize how freaked out I must have been to sleep in the middle of my parents at the age of 16? It got worse. A week later, the same evil, black, shadowy spirit came back again. I woke up, terrified, and paralyzed again. But I caught my breath back quicker this time. One more time I screamed as I looked this terrifying spirit in the face. The shape was so dark, I could not make out a face. It went flying out the sliding glass patio bedroom doors again. That night, I got in bed with my sister, and I stayed awake most of the night, too scared to go back to sleep. I was angry with this evil spirit for coming to see me. It seemed to know that it was scaring me to death. The next day, I told my mom about these two experiences. She believed me, and she said I should courageously tell the spirit next time it appeared to simply stop coming to see me, stop scaring me, that I should face my fears and demand this spirit to leave me alone and stop. I know my mom was right. I did need to show this dark spirit that I was not frightened. Perhaps this sinister thing was somehow feeding off of my fear. It's a very good point.
Really good point.
Maybe even enjoying it. Around 2 weeks passed, and I thought hopefully it would not return, but it came once more. And although I was fearful, I was ready to tell this wicked darkness to leave me alone. I stared right at the spirit. While it lay on top of me, I shouted at the wretched thing, ordering it to stop coming to see me. I was furious, and I used some pretty rude language to scare it away. I also swung my arms in its face, and my arms sliced right through it again. But this time it worked. It vanished through the window once more, and it didn't stay as long as it did the other times before. I was terrified, but also grateful that I had finally faced my fear. I took my power back, and I shouted that I was not scared of it. A month later, I found out why the energy possibly was visiting me. My older sister Shirley had been released from Holloway Prison 3 months prior to my experience. While she was incarcerated there, she and some other inmates had used a talking board, homemade talking board. She said they were successful in connecting with the other side. The day that she was released from prison, she had given me a ring that she said she'd found. It was silver with a simple black stone in the middle. And I happened to be wearing this ring each time the spirit came to me. So I went across the road from my house, I threw the ring into a bin, and I have not seen the spirit since. It's now been over 12 years. That happened back in 2003. I will never use the Ouija board myself. I believe you shouldn't play with things you don't understand. Recent research has led me to believe this malicious spirit may have been what is called a jinn, or a shadow person. This experience is the most terrifying of many scary things that have happened throughout my life. Although this deeply disturbing memory will stay with me forever, it did make me feel stronger. and I always try to face my fears today. Thank you, Emma.
That was very spooky good
Is
one.
that a great story? Thank you, Emma. She describes, was shadowy, winged almost, like smoky, black, heavy presence, malicious intent?
And I think what's interesting about that is that link between the physical, and I'm wondering if the sister was wearing that ring whilst she was
that's interesting,
using the board, and that ring was on, would have been the thing that would have been closest. So they could have captured some of the energy, or at least been a sort of a portal.
I don't know if you're allowed to wear jewelry in prison. I'm not sure. I don't have any idea. But she had the courage to face it. Some people are speechless. Some people can't move when this thing is upon them. The jinn, that is another name for demon.
Yeah, the jinn or the genie. That's where you have to trick them to put them away. That's where you get the idea of a genie in a bottle, because you have to trick them and then put the cork. You can trap them in something. So the idea of trapping them into a lamp or a bottle or a vessel, and then you seal them in there, trapped in there.
Oh, that's interesting. So they can't come out.
Let the genie out of the bottle is to let the jinn or the evil spirit out.
Because then the trouble stays in there, and that keeps the demon away.
Absolutely, trapped within the container. As far as I understand, it's certainly a sort of Middle Eastern Arabic tradition of the jinn or genie. They're very malicious, very nasty spirits, but they do have some power. So that's why we get the story of rubbing the lamp and getting the genie out. So you can also have a certain amount of control of this evil spirit, and he can do things on your bidding. But there's also the idea that you will trap the thing into a container, something that could be sealed, a lamp, a vessel, a jar, whatever, and then that would be buried with the energy within it. It was a way of trapping the energy if that energy was causing too much trouble.
It makes so much sense when you hear the backstory of all of these fairy tales, doesn't it? You start to see it's not always happy, shiny, joyful, I dream a genie stuff.
No, it's certainly not. And the other thing I was thinking about that story is about simply having control and not giving in to fear, because anything negative is going to feed on fear. It's what it wants. It wants to devour that fear. So fear is exactly what it's looking to create. So you've probably got two ways out. Be angry with it, take control, tell it to go away, or have compassion. Compassion being the opposite to fear would also drive it away. So you've got those two tools. One, go away, but the other one is to actually just drench the thing in compassion rather than fear.
Those are the two opposites, are they not?
Yeah.
Well, they say, love and hate are not opposites. It's love and fear, right?
Yeah.
So you're actually putting the water on the fire, if you will. Yeah.
As a basic chemistry there.
That's true. We want to thank you, Emma. Thank you so much for such an amazing story. And remember, when you are submitting your stories, you can write in like Emma did so I can read it for you. Or you can also, on your smartphone, it is very easy. All you have to do is go into the little record option, and then it will give you an icon that you can email it, attach that MP3 as an email, and we can insert that into the show as well and share that with our listeners so you can tell your story.
Yeah.
Storiesfromthestandingroom.com or at Facebook. And on YouTube, you can send us messages there. It's Stories from the Standing Room. Just find us and do send those in. We did have an inquiry today about would we be covering the Slim Man? I think it's the Slim Man. Have you heard of this really tall,
skinny person?
Skinny guy.
But I have now, yeah.
Well, I know that we're probably past the demographic, but it's a folklore, a modern folklore. The Slender Man, I think as they call him. We'll have to look into him.
Yeah. But
there's been some really tragic things that have happened. Some people have gone, it's been murders and stuff. This is a very dark, tall, thin man that when he appears, I don't know if I want to talk about him too much, but...
if it gets too negative, it's one of those things best stay away from, really.
Kind of gives me the creeps when I think about it. Yeah. People have asked if we were covering certain things, but today we are talking about childhood fears. What scared you the most when you were little?
Well, I think going back to different stages of my life, different things scared me. Because adolescent, I remember being scared of mirrors, particularly at night, walking past them.
Really?
And in fact, I still, if I'm in a hotel, I don't like it if I have a mirror in the room I'm sleeping in. I still don't like mirrors at night. And that one, we have some mirrors around the house, and they're not in the room I'm sleeping in.
Well, what about when you go to the loo and in our hallway bathroom? Does that freak you out?
I don't really look at it. Or if sometimes I can look at it several times and just double check in a kind of scribing way, things are as they should be in there.
Is it because it's dark?
I don't know what it is. It's a very, very deep, basic fear. I mean, that's something I've always had. I remember different mirrors as a child, looking at them and being quite scared by them. It's almost like the idea we talked about, the black mirror, the scrying mirror, etc. It being, are you looking at a reflection of yourself, or are you seeing someone in a different dimension who is the same as you looking at you? There's all kind of things which in the day don't bother me, but at night do. I mean, that's a later kind of fear, thinking about fears and things which are more sort of irrational. But I think as a child, it had to be Jason and the Argonauts.
The skeletons.
The skeletons.
They were scary. Skulls.
They were really, and still are scary.
They are.
The way they creak and move with those swords.
That was really advanced technology back then.
Scary, whatever.
It was really, really horrifying for a lot of us of that generation.
Yeah.
I remember my mother asking me, what is the issue? I go, well, it's a skeleton. That's the most horrifying thing. She goes, it wouldn't do anything. If you had a skeleton in front of you right now, there would be no harm, that nothing would happen to you. But a murderer could come in the house or what have you. She didn't understand why the skull or the skeleton. Perhaps it was just the very first part of understanding mortality. I don't know, but it was very, very scary. The Screaming Skull. Did you get that movie over here?
I'm vaguely aware of it by you, but no, I'm aware of the concept of screaming skulls and houses that have screaming skulls. It is certainly a tradition. Well, I think
houses have screaming skulls.
These are things that have built up over centuries, and I think living in California, you're not going to be by houses which have had a screaming skull for the last 800 years. And let's say they're not screaming skulls as such. They tend to be stories of houses which have skulls in them, which if you move them, there will be a number of unexplainable activities happening in that house, and one of them can be screaming. So it's not like people have these skulls and they sit on the table and they scream like a 70s musical box. What it is if these, as a common thread that runs through all of these stories, they're in a lot of places in the UK. There's a place, Derbyshire, Tunston Milton has a house there. There's a place near Manchester has a skull of a priest, and I think that's Wardley Hall. And then there's Burton Agnes Hall in Yorkshire, and a number of houses in the UK that have these skulls. And the thing that links them is if you take the skull away from the house, bad things happen.
Okay, I have to know why. First, do they have skulls?
Well, I think historically people had skulls because if the skull was taken back to the house, for instance, if somebody had been decapitated, if they had a head chopped off, if they're a nobleman, maybe the body would be thrown away, and then the skull later, after it had been shown on a spike, would go back to the house and that would be buried. So maybe they weren't always buried, maybe they were put into the wall.
Like for posterity?
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about modern society. I think most of these skulls do not come from the modern epoch. Now, Betterscombe has a skull, which has a number of stories associated to this. They did do carbon dating on this skull, and they said the skull's about 2,000 years old.
Jeez.
So they're not quite sure where this skull comes from. And that story is the classic. If the skull is taken away from the house, and it has been, there's a lot of really strange and spooky stuff goes on, and it's really becomes a kind of not a pleasant experience, and there's a lot of banging and shouting and screaming. So that's where the idea of the screaming skull comes from. Another story I'm thinking of, I think it's a place called Warburton Priory in Sussex. Now, this used to be a priory in the Middle Ages, and now it's a farmhouse. It was converted maybe 500 years ago. They were doing some work on the house, and the workmen found, I think maybe 150, 200 years ago, they were opening up a wall and they found a small cavity, and there were two skulls in the cavity. One is believed to be the man who was murdered, and the other one is the insane man who murdered him. Now, I don't know why the skulls were put into this cavity. Even when it was found 200 years ago, did they know this? But there certainly is this story of a murder victim and the murderer in the house.
Did they bury the rest of the body or just the skull?
They don't know. Well, first of all, they found the one skull, and it was buried in the garden. And the next morning, it had not only made its way back to the surface,
God,
but it was on the back door. It was sitting by the kitchen doorstep.
I think that sounds very 70s. That sounds like a very 70s horror movie.
It does, but this is recorded around, I think it was about 1820.
Dear God, so the skull moved? It's not just screaming, it's moving?
It moved out of the ground, so they took it into the house and placed it onto a Bible. Now, A few days later, they found a second skull, and the workman who found that skull then took it home. But he was already aware of what happened to the first skull because news had got around the village. Lots of unpleasant things were happening that night in his house. The next morning, he took it straight back to the house and said, there you go, I found this skull as another one. I took it home and I think it needs to stay in the house. And they kept them both in this house. Now, when the person who owned it was renting that farmhouse, and when he was old, he left the farmhouse and took one of the skulls with him, leaving the other one. And as soon as the skull was taken to the new house, literally all hell broke loose, and the skull was then returned.
Really?
Yeah. Here's the interesting twist in the tale. They could never get rid of this. They could never give the skull away. But if the skull was taken, the skull would be taken. It would be the responsibility of the person who took it. And somebody broke into the house around, I think, about 1890 and stole the skulls and took them away.
Both of them?
Yeah.
What happened?
They were just never returned. But because the onus wasn't on the owner to give them away or to do something with them, whatever happened to the person that stole one, he probably wouldn't know what was happening. Somebody just sort of broke into the house, took stuff, took two skulls too, not knowing the story, maybe didn't put two and two together, and then we don't know. But
so somewhere out there could be mayhem happening for reasons he does not know, or they do not know.
Exactly. But as I say, this was probably in the 1890s, so where those skulls are now, who knows?
Oh my God.
Probably
they
hopefully
could be
buried.
Just the fact that they came out of the ground.
Exactly. Well, only one of them did, but the other one also created mayhem when it was taken away. So they're both very active skulls. And they knew they could never take them out of the house, and they weren't, because one was later taken out of the house, but it had to be returned.
I will have to say, the child in me, knowing that a skull is buried and that it is making its way to the top, is probably one of the scariest things I have ever heard.
And levitating and landing on the doorstep.
Maybe it could be our generation. Is it a generational thing?
I don't know. I just think it's scary.
It's horrifying.
I know. Well, there was a similar story over the road from my office at work.
What happened?
Well, when they were building a new block, a new building, they had to dig the foundations, and what they'd hit was, first of all, they found part of an old cellar wall, and they were just taking this back. I mean, we're talking a house that probably went back to the late Middle Ages. So they were removing this wall, and then as they were just digging away, just moving the earth, they found a skull. So the police were called in. The police then did the usual sort of scientific tests on it and dated it as being, at the time of death, being somewhere between 1500 and 1550. So the police were not at all interesting. So it was just buried in a local churchyard or something. The police looked at it and they said the cause of death was decapitation. The head had been taken off. That was what killed the person, because they could see the blade going through. So that appears to be somebody who had the head chopped off. The head had been taken back, and maybe for some reason that person couldn't be buried in hallowed ground. So they
buried it in the wall?
Buried it in the cellar. That was still the ground. I mean, strange thing to do, I know, and there's no explanation because we don't know why that was buried there. That was 500 years ago, and there's been a lot of stuff happening on that site. Yep. It was just that, and that was just over the road from my office. I had no stories of screaming skulls, but it was certainly a found skull behind a wall.
Actually, our house, the house that we're recording this in right now, dates back to 450 years ago. We have a cellar that's closed up that we don't have any idea.
Well, we probably don't have any skulls.
But there's people died all over the place.
Yes,
we don't know.
But because this is a very particular one with a skull. I mean, this is quite a strange one, really. But that also reminds me of the story that we have in North Devon, which is quite close to where we are.
Yes.
It's the same county. It's not too far away. And in the mid-19th century, someone was doing some work on a roof. He was looking at the wall and thought, oh, strange, I can see the shape of a window here. And thinking, well, what room is it? Went back in the house and thought, I'll have a look, see where it was. And couldn't work out where it was, and realised there was something not right. He couldn't work out where that space was. And he and his wife went around tapping the walls. Eventually they found a slightly different sound and broke through, and there was a room, very, very dusty room, and it had been bricked up. The room had been boarded up, but the window had been bricked up so he couldn't see it from the outside. And inside, what was quite strange, was a four-post bed with very tattered, decomposing curtains around it, completely breaking up, and an oak chair and an oak table. So a really very Gothic scene, and even food and plates on the table. And in the bed was a skeleton.
God.
Dressed, decomposing
Well, it
clothes.
didn't decompose.
Yeah. Well, they believe it was from the 1690s, and this was the 1860s, and they'd found it. So
200 years.
A couple of 100 years.
Did they know the story?
The story goes something like this, that the man who lived in the house wanted to buy it. He rented it, but didn't have enough money. And his daughter had married somebody who lived in Dublin. So one night there was a storm, and he went down to have a look because they knew there was a ship out there, and realised the ship had sunk, and there was an injured woman, very injured and very bruised, so they couldn't even see her face. She was in a really bad state, being knocked around the rocks. So he was able to carry her back to the house, and they put her into the bed, and she had some jewels. Now, they weren't going to particularly kill her and steal the jewels, but they found that she had the jewels, and they were saying, let's not tell her that we have got the jewels. Let's steal the jewels, but let's not do anything nasty with her. And then they discovered that after she started to speak, it was their daughter, but they didn't recognise her because she was so beaten on the rocks they couldn't recognise her face. But she died, and he was so horrified that he was going to steal from his daughter that he actually just couldn't deal with it and bricked his daughter into the room, and he went mad. So that's the story.
So the woman that he found on the rocks was really his daughter?
Yeah, and it's a place called Chambercombe Manor near Ilfracombe. So that's the story, the legend of what happened. But certainly the body was found in the 1860s.
That's just the idea of knowing that for 200 years there it sat.
So yeah, just lay on the bed.
So he bricked it up just because he couldn't deal with his own...
Because he couldn't deal with it, so he bricked up the window and then boarded up and plastered over the door, so no one knew that room was there.
And then he carried on living in the house and went mad after that?
Yeah, he went mad quite quickly because he just couldn't deal with the idea. But one, his daughter died, and secondly, he was going to steal from her.
Wow, that's really deeply psychologically intriguing.
Yes, it is, and from different levels.
Yeah, physically wanting to keep this away from your visual sight, but having to live with your choices and the depth of your debauchery driving you insane.
Yeah. And I think there's another story which is quite similar to that. Also, there's a lot of hauntings in that room now, and a lot of hauntings. There are children and different ghosts in that place at Chambercombe Manor. So it's very haunted anyway. I think you can go and see it. I think it's a trust that owns it. Yeah, I think you can go into the room now. It
would have been really, really, really very creepy to have been in the 1800s to actually have seen.
Yeah.
What as you went through
the decomposing, dust-covered room. No, only been in there for 200 years, and the skeleton's still dressed,
everything
lying
preserved
on the bed. Yeah, there was another story, kind of related to it, and it's about a body being found behind panelling. Okay, there's a house called, I think it's Light and Mott or something like that. In the 1870s, the owners became really concerned by the atmosphere in a certain room. And they could never warm it up. It didn't matter if they could put fires on or it was a summer's day. It was always unnaturally cold. And they got so concerned, they actually brought some builders in and they said, just examine this room. Something's not right. We don't feel it's right. We can never warm it up. No one will go in the room. People don't like going in the room, etc. And the builders messed around and they realised one of the walls was seen to sound hollow. So they broke through the panelling, and behind it was a chair with a skeleton sitting in it. 1870s. Why the skeleton seemed to be behind it's almost like they were hiding or something. But there are several stories, and none of them really add up. But there is the idea of a form of execution is to brick someone up.
Yes.
That they would just die either by lack of food or dehydration. But this is something where it wasn't bricked up, it was behind panelling, so it makes no sense.
So they could have gotten out. Maybe they're just hiding a murdered body. But it was seated, but you can still see.
Seated. It was more likely to be that person wanted to be behind there or was hiding.
Maybe then their essence stayed and remained and kept the room cold. Who knows?
It was something like that, but it was very scary.
It sounds horrifying. All the stories that you told me tick the box of the child within because they're all about the things that used to scare us, the Jason and the Argo.
Yeah, skeletons behind the wall, skeletons in decomposing clothing and stuff like that.
God.
I mean, there's lots. There are a number of these places where There are a number of these places where traditionally you have got bodies behind walls and ghosts related, as like Leap Castle in Southern Ireland and places like that. And then there's the Oscar Wilde story as the Canterville Ghost.
What's that?
The Canterville Ghost it's sweet, it's like a kid's ghost story. But the main character has been like bricked up and his body's behind the wall. If I remember rightly, it's like that thing of the Canterville Ghost. So it's there, it's within our culture of being bricked up behind the wall.
That'd be a terrible way to die.
Yeah.
Imagine.
It would be far slower from being buried alive, because that way you suffocate and you wouldn't get, the air would go quite quickly. But that way you're just going to die quite slowly. So it's really strange and scary and spooky. And you've also got the remains behind the wall, which make it even creepier.
It's like the French oubliettes. Remember those? The oubliettes, the hole in the floor where they throw you down on the spike.
Yeah.
And then you could still hear, if you'd lived through that fall, you could still hear the merriment of the drinking and eating and smell the food from the kitchen, but you starved to death.
You just starved to death.
And there were piles and piles of bodies. It's inhumanity. Yeah. So
scary stuff.
It would be very, very
scary. You can see why the ghost stories around those kind of places are particular resonance, are particularly scary. It
would be a horrible, horrible way to go.
Yeah, very gruesome for Halloween. Oh, I've got one more if you want to.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Last story was a bit of a gruesome story, which is about as we're on bodies. And that was a woman called Mary Gateman. And Mary Gateman was executed in York, I think, in about 1809, 1810.
Yes.
And she was a kind of a fake witch, fake psychic reader kind of thing. Apparently murdered and was tried and was executed for the murder of one of her gullible clients, and she was trying to trick them out of money.
Yes, that's common.
And what was gruesome about her is, after the execution, she was very famous for being a kind of fake witch, but also believed to have supernatural powers. So she was gibbeted in Leeds, where the crime had happened. And so her body was put into the gibbet to decompose. And all the people kind of went and ripped bits of flesh off and took it home for like a talisman.
So wait, can I ask about the gibbet? Did they put her in there after she was dead?
Oh,
or
yeah.
They put her in there.
Yeah,
okay.
you would be hung as you would be hung by like a rope, and the body would be put into an iron cage and hung to stop people committing crime in future as a warning. Yes. So she was gibbeted or put into the gibbet, and so instead of just decomposing, as they used to put them in places where there'd been highway crimes, to kind of frighten people off, to say, don't do it, this could be you next.
That's a good point.
But her body, they all went and took pieces of flesh off and took it home with them.
Thing.
I have a bit of that flesh, I have a bit of that.
So,
take it home.
So they left it within grabbing reach for them.
Yeah. I don't know if maybe they took the flesh off the legs and the other bit just rotted naturally.
Oh my God, honey, it's all so horrifying.
Or gruesomely skeletal for Halloween.
It is perfect for Halloween, especially there are others out there that are like us that grew up in that generation. That
Jason and the Argonauts
before computers. Actually, Jason and the Argonauts. That is so brilliant because it was very. I think that might even have been slow motion animation, like claymation.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
Yeah,
and that's why you've got that very disjointed, very rattly, very robotic movement of the skeletons.
Made it more scary, though.
Yeah, it did. Click, click, click.
Yeah. Because if they were smooth, if they moved smoothly...
Oh, yeah, that wouldn't work. But that very jerky motion of their skeletons and the way they'd move their heads towards you and move their heads back.
I've got more creeps from this episode than any episode prior.
See, we're scared of... Well, I am.
We've scared ourselves. Yeah. So will you look in the mirror tonight when you go to the loo?
Well, I doubt it. I haven't looked at it for the last how many years.
You don't look?
Ever.
You don't look
I've never looked in mirrors at night. I don't look... Or I do.
Is it because it's dark outside?
No,
if it's dark, or is it a time period?
No, I mean, I'm not always keen on them in the day, but they don't really bother me when it's dark in the dark room.
You have one of those old, what is that, 1800s, the mirror we have in there? That's like the
it's very crackle. Yeah, but that's great because that has a screen in between it. It's like having a cage in between it. It's
a perfect haunted house mirror, and it's what year is it?
But it's like it's not. It's almost like you can't step through, or you can't. It's a barrier because of the state of the mirror.
Okay, because the paint's coming off the back.
Yeah, it's like you can't. It's like they're not, the two worlds aren't quite together.
But that to me seems far more scary than our nighttime bathroom.
Yeah, but for me, I don't know. Most times I don't even think about it, but sometimes I can. And certainly if I go into a hotel room and there are mirrors on the walls, I don't like it because I can't cover them.
That's right, because they're flat. So what do you do?
I just feel presence sometimes. I just don't like them. I mean, it is just it's a form of a phobia, I suppose. But it's something I've never really been particularly happy with, particularly at night.
I've never even thought about that. Do you ever smile at yourself when you see yourself in the mirror, or do you keep a straight face?
No, I'm not on friendly terms in mirrors.
You're not? That's interesting. Well, you know what? It has creeped me out. That skull coming out of the ground will be with me for the rest of the night. So
working its way to the surface
Dear
and then
God.
making its own way to the doorstep.
Oh, jeez. That's enough. That is enough. Well, actually, it's not enough. We need to do this again next week.
Next week, ramping up for Halloween.
We are. So please send in your stories, your horrifying
keep it scary,
happenings.
Keep it horrifying.
Yes, absolutely. Please. And remember, find us over at Twitter at Stories from the Standing Room. We are Standing Room HRH on Twitter. Facebook, we are Stories from the Standing Room. You can find us on YouTube. Our little channel is growing. SoundCloud and iTunes, we are Stories from the Standing Room. And our website is storiesfromthestandingroom.com. We just now, today, it just went up on this Hunter's Moon evening. Our contact button has just gone up, so it makes it a lot easier for you to get your stories into us.
Oh,
so please send those in, and we'll be back next week for more history, folklore, facts, and horror. Well, it's not really horror. It's more, well, it can be. It was horrifying tonight.
It was horrifying. I mean, it moved away from the spooky into the horrifying.
Well, because for me, absolutely, that would be...
It's the hardcore scary, without being too negative, but it's just hardcore scary.
Well, I'll be thinking about those
All
stories
those bodies
tonight.
behind those walls.
Yes, I know.
Glad we got solid stone walls.
What about our cellar that's been closed?
Full of bodies.
It probably could. What it could be? You showed that little gate, and you out in front, and you said that the little grate goes to the cellar.
Yeah.
So underneath us, how much space would there have been?
Well, I mean, I don't think there'd be particularly visible bodies now, because when they worked on the house a few years ago, they would have been down there and they closed it then. But who knows what's behind the walls?
We don't know what's in our cellar, do we?
We don't know what's behind the walls. They're under the floor.
God, and neither do you. So we wish you that was a very evil laugh, husband.
It's supposed to be.
And we will see you next week for another episode of Stories from the Standing Room. We love you very much.
We do.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.